Cold start video. It's not that cold. It's about 23 degrees out here. Car's in the garage, so the temperature in the garage is probably a little higher. This is a VVT compound boosted, so it's got a 1 liter MP62 supercharger and a GTX 2867R turbocharger. Hot side is 64AR. Supercharger is important because that's added load during the startup sequence. 510C coils with ID 850 injectors. Car's been sitting. I did have it on a battery maintainer, so the battery voltage should be halfway decent. Battery's getting tired though. Let's see what we got here. 30-degree CLT 29 manifold air temp with 15, 21, 25 degrees on 27 degrees on the fuel. This is a winter blend E85 running at about E70. Actually super beneficial that they go to E70. People complain about that, but if they didn't go to E70, the car wouldn't start at these temperatures, because it's the gasoline that we're actually burning on these cold starts. I should say that I am not a petroleum engineer, a chemical engineer, or an automotive engineer, so everything I say is based on research and experimentation. So let's see how she does. The VVT. So we're running a whole bunch of enrichment right now, 60%. And you'll see ASE is off before EGO has started correcting. We're still super rich, so we're burning gasoline. So this number is not unusual. So I wouldn't call it a perfect start, but it started. How is the question? Few things I will point out on getting getting the cold start to work. First is I use a Westfield alternator board, MS3 Pro, by the way. I use a Westfield alternator design, and so with the alternator, I disable the alternator from firing up. This is the wrong spot. So the alternator doesn't turn on until we hit 1,000 RPM. Notice it's a greater than 1,000 RPM with a hysteresis of 500. You have to use the greater than convention here. So the hysteresis goes on the bottom side. This hysteresis does not appear to be symmetric about your threshold. So it's not 1,500 to 500. It's now the hysteresis is down to 500 RPM. So the alternator stays on down to 500, and I make sure that my cold crank RPM goes over 1,000, even if it's even if I'm running on a hot day. As far as startup and idle are concerned, the cranking pulse has this huge jump at around 50 or so degrees. That's related to the volatility of ethanol. So down here, these look like somewhat reasonable normal numbers for the cranking pulse. You're talking about, and I use a crank taper, so the 40, 45, 55 may be different than what a normal install would see. But as you can see, once it hits 50, it just rockets up to the top. I consider cold start to be at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, so 23 was really not all that cold. The taper curve is really interesting. So on the first event, I launch a bunch more fuel in there, and that first event kind of serves as an additional priming pulse, because sometimes I may turn the engine to start and then not crank for some time, and so I kind of lose the effectiveness of the formal priming pulse. So what I do is I give myself a priming pulse that's correlated with cranking through this crank taper, and you see it tapers very quickly. After the third event, it's tapered to 100. So 4 and on, it tapers to 100, and then out here at the end, I pull some fuel to prevent flooding in an event that there's a flood of it's flooding for some reason. One thing to note about cranking is that it is tied to rect fuel, not to the fueling equation. So when you do 300% in cranking, it's actually 300%, 3 times your rect fuel, not 3 times your needed fuel per the VE table. After start, very similar. Starting at around 50 degrees, we see a big ramp up in the amount of after start fuel, and then down in the higher temperatures, we don't have very much after start fuel. After start taper, notice I use a constant number here. I've requested that the feature tying EGO to the after start enrichment taper be added. I haven't gotten any traction on that, but I feel like it would be a very valuable function or feature. So after start lasts for 15 seconds. This is the time domain function, and then you'll see that I have EGO set up to kick in at 15 seconds. So that way EGO and after start aren't fighting each other. Warm up is following a same pattern. At roughly 50 degrees, we start seeing a big ramp up in the amount of warm up enrichment that we ask for. So basically that's it. I guess there's a couple of other yeah, I'm not going to get into that conversation right now. Anyways, good luck.